Charles Bronson witnessed a hit and run. His hunt for justice became legend. The accident happened at 3:45 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in September 1979. Charles Bronson was sitting in his parked Cadillac outside a small grocery store in Burbank, waiting for his wife Jill to finish shopping, when he saw the whole thing unfold in front of him. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, was walking home from school with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She was crossing at the intersection, using the crosswalk exactly like she'd been taught, when a black Mercedes sedan came speeding through the red light. The impact was sickening. The little girl was thrown 15 feet through the air, her small body crumpling on the asphalt like a broken doll. The Mercedes never even slowed down. Charles caught a glimpse of the driver, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked back once in his rearview mirror before speeding away. Charles was out of his car and running toward the girl before the Mercedes was out of sight. Other people were gathering around, but nobody seemed to know what to do. The little girl was unconscious, blood pooling beneath her head, her breathing shallow and irregular. "Call 911. Charles shouted to the crowd. "Now." He knelt beside the girl, careful not to move her in case she had spinal injuries. She was so small, so fragile. Her school ID was pinned to her backpack. Maria Gonzalez, 2nd grade, Roosevelt Elementary. "Maria," Charles said softly. "Can you hear me? Help is coming, sweetheart. Just hold on." The ambulance arrived within minutes, followed by police. As the paramedics worked on Maria, loading her onto a stretcher, Charles approached the investigating officer. "I saw the whole thing," he told Officer Janet Rodriguez. "Hit and run. Black Mercedes, newer model. License plate started with 8G, but I couldn't get the rest." "Can you describe the driver?" "White male, maybe 45 to 50 years old. Dark hair, expensive suit. He looked back once after he hit her, then kept driving." Officer Rodriguez wrote everything down. "Mr. Bronson, yes, I recognize you, this is very helpful. Most witnesses in these situations are too shocked to remember details. Will you be able to find him?" "We'll do our best. But without a complete license plate or better identification, it's going to be difficult." Charles watched the ambulance disappear down the street, sirens wailing. He felt a familiar anger building in his chest, the same rage he'd felt as a kid watching bullies pick on smaller children, the same fury that had driven him out of the coal mines and into a career playing men who fought for justice. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life, and a little girl was fighting for her life because some coward in an expensive car couldn't be bothered to stop at a red light. That evening, Charles called the hospital. Maria Gonzalez was in critical condition, severe head trauma, internal bleeding, multiple broken bones. The doctors weren't sure if she would make it through the night. Charles also made another call, to a private investigator named Mickey Torino who'd helped him with research for some of his films. Mickey had connections throughout Los Angeles, legitimate and otherwise. "Mickey, I need a favor. I'm looking for a black Mercedes that was involved in a hit and run this afternoon in Burbank." "What's the story, Charlie?" Charles told him about Maria Gonzalez and the coward who'd left her to die in the street. Partial license plate starting with 8G, driver was a well-dressed middle-aged man. This wasn't some kid joyriding, this was someone with money who thinks he's above the law. "Give me 24 hours, Mickey said. "And Charlie? What are you planning to do if I find this guy?" "I'm going to make sure he pays for what he did." The next morning, Charles visited Maria in the ICU. She was unconscious, surrounded by machines, her small head wrapped in bandages. Her parents, Elena and Carlos Gonzalez, were sitting beside her bed. They looked like they'd been crying for hours. "Are you family?" Elena asked when she saw Charles. "No, ma'am. I'm the one who saw the accident. I wanted to check on Maria and see if there's anything I can do to help." Carlos looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "You're Charles Bronson. The actor. I am. And I'm also a father. If this had happened to my daughter, I'd want to know that someone was looking out for her. Elena started crying again. The doctors say she might not wake up. And even if she does, there could be brain damage, permanent disabilities. What about the police investigation? Carlos's face hardened. They say they're doing everything they can, but they don't have much to go on. The detective told us that most hit-and-run cases go unsolved unless there are witnesses willing to come forward. I'm willing to come forward, Charles said. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to find the man who did this. That afternoon, Mickey called with information. I found your Mercedes, Charlie. Registered to a guy named Jonathan Whitmore. Lives in Beverly Hills, works as a vice president at Consolidated Financial Group. You sure it's him? Black 1979 Mercedes 450 SL, license plate 8GNK472. Fits your description perfectly. And here's the interesting part, Whitmore reported the car stolen yesterday evening, about 12 hours after your hit and run. Charles felt his jaw clench. He's trying to cover his tracks. Gets better. I did some digging on this guy. Whitmore's got a history. 2 previous DUIs that got reduced to reckless driving because he has expensive lawyers. Last year, he rear-ended a family in Malibu and claimed the other driver was at fault until security camera footage proved otherwise. Where does he live? Charlie, whatever you're thinking of doing. I'm thinking of making sure Jonathan Whitmore faces justice for what he did to that little girl. The legal kind of justice, right? Charles was quiet for a moment. That depends on whether the legal system is willing to do its job. Jonathan Whitmore lived in a mansion in the hills above Beverly Hills, the kind of house that screamed money and privilege. Charles parked across the street and waited. He'd learned patience in the coal mines, and he could wait as long as it took. Around 6 p.m., a taxi pulled up to the house and Whitmore got out. He was exactly as Charles remembered. Middle-aged, well-dressed, the kind of man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. Charles got out of his car and walked across the street. Mr. Whitmore. Whitmore turned, and when he recognized Charles, his face went pale. You're Charles Bronson. That's right. And you're the man who hit Maria Gonzalez with your Mercedes yesterday and left her to die in the street. I don't know what you're talking about. Whitmore started backing toward his front door. I reported my car stolen yesterday. Funny thing about that, Charles said, following him. You reported it stolen 12 hours after the accident. Almost like you needed time to think up a cover story. Whitmore fumbled with his keys. This is harassment. I'm going to call the police. Go ahead. I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear about your Mercedes. The one you claimed was stolen but somehow got returned to your garage without you noticing. Charles had done his homework. Mickey's contacts had confirmed that Whitmore's car was parked in his private garage, apparently recovered after being stolen. You're making a mistake, Whitmore said. I have lawyers. Powerful friends. You can't just accuse people of crimes without proof. I don't need to accuse you. I saw you. I was sitting 20 feet away when you ran that red light and hit a 7-year-old girl. I saw your face when you looked back at her broken body lying in the street. And I saw you speed away like the coward you are. Whitmore's hands were shaking as he finally got his door open. Even if that were true, which it's not, you can't prove anything. It's your word against mine. Charles smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Jonathan, let me explain something about my reputation. I've made a career playing men who hunt down people like you. Men who think money and lawyers make them untouchable. Those are just movies. Are they? Because right now, I'm very tempted to show you what happens when Charles Bronson stops playing characters and starts being himself. Whitmore tried to slam the door, but Charles put his foot in the way. Here's what's going to happen, Charles said quietly. You're going to confess to what you did. You're going to turn yourself in to the police. And you're going to make sure Maria Gonzalez's family has everything they need for her medical care and recovery. And if I don't, then I'm going to make your life very difficult. See, Jonathan, you made one crucial mistake. You hurt a child in front of Charles Bronson. And Charles Bronson doesn't let people get away with hurting children. Charles leaned closer. I have resources you can't imagine. I have friends in places you don't want to know about. And I have a very long memory. If you don't do the right thing, I will make sure that everyone in this city knows what kind of man you really are. You're threatening me. I'm promising you. Maria Gonzalez is fighting for her life because of your cowardice. Either you step up and take responsibility, or I will make sure that running down that little girl becomes the most expensive mistake you ever made. Whitmore stared at Charles for a long moment, and Charles could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. How much trouble would it be to fight Charles Bronson? How much would it cost? How much attention would it bring? What exactly do you want me to do? Tomorrow morning, you walk into the Burbank Police Department and confess to the hit and run. You provide full details about what happened, and you don't mention this conversation. You also establish a medical fund for Maria's treatment and recovery. How much money? Whatever it costs. Her family shouldn't have to worry about medical bills because you were too important to stop at a red light. The next morning, Jonathan Whitmore walked into the Burbank Police Department and confessed to the hit and run. He claimed he'd been overcome with panic after the accident and had made a terrible mistake by leaving the scene. The confession made front-page news in the Los Angeles Times. Beverly Hills executive confesses to hit and run, read the headline, along with Whitmore's mug shot and details about the case. But the real story came 3 days later, when Charles visited Maria in the hospital. She was awake for the first time since the accident, her eyes bright and alert despite the bandages and medical equipment. "Hi, sweetheart," Charles said, sitting beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" "My head hurts," Maria said softly. "But the doctor says I'm going to be okay." Elena Gonzalez was crying tears of relief. "The doctors say she's made remarkable progress. No permanent brain damage, no paralysis. She'll need physical therapy, but she's going to recover completely." "That's wonderful news." "Mr. Bronson," Carlos said, "we heard about the man who hit Maria. How he turned himself in. The police said he mentioned you during his confession." "Did he?" "They also said he's established a medical fund to pay for all of Maria's treatment and rehabilitation. $200,000. Charles smiled. "That's good. Children shouldn't have to suffer because of adult mistakes." 6 months later, Maria Gonzalez was back in school, walking and running like any normal 8-year-old. The only reminder of her accident was a small scar on her forehead that she proudly told people made her look tough like Charles Bronson. Jonathan Whitmore pleaded guilty to vehicular assault and leaving the scene of an accident. He received 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. His driver's license was permanently revoked, and he was ordered to perform 2,000 hours of community service at local hospitals. But more importantly, the case became a landmark prosecution for hit-and-run accidents in Los Angeles County. District Attorney's Office used it as an example of how seriously they would pursue drivers who fled the scene of accidents, especially those involving children. In 1995, 16 years after the accident, Charles received an invitation to Maria Gonzalez's high school graduation. She had been class valedictorian and was headed to UCLA on a full academic scholarship to study medicine. At the graduation party, Maria introduced Charles to her friends and family as the man who saved my life twice, once at the scene of the accident, and once by making sure the person who hurt me faced justice. "I want to be a doctor," Maria told Charles. "Specifically, I want to work in emergency medicine, helping children who've been in accidents like I was." "That's a wonderful goal, Maria. You'll make an excellent doctor." "Mr. Bronson, can I ask you something? Why did you get so involved in my case? You didn't know me or my family. Charles thought for a moment. Maria, I grew up around people who believe that when you see something wrong happening, you don't look the other way. You do something about it. When I saw you lying in that street, I couldn't just be a witness. I had to be someone who fought for you. Charles Bronson died in 2003. Dar. Maria Gonzalez, by then Chief of Pediatric Emergency Medicine at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, spoke at his memorial service. 24 years ago, she told the assembled mourners, Charles Bronson could have been just another bystander who saw a terrible accident. Instead, he chose to be a man who demanded justice for a child who couldn't fight for herself. Dr. Gonzalez looked out at the crowd. Charles taught me that real strength isn't about being tough enough to hurt people. Real strength is about being brave enough to protect people, especially those who can't protect themselves. That lesson shaped my entire life. Today, the Maria Gonzalez Trauma Center at Children's Hospital Los Angeles treats over 3,000 young accident victims each year. Above the entrance to the emergency department is a plaque that reads, "In honor of Charles Bronson, who proved that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is refuse to look away." But the real memorial to Charles Bronson isn't a building or a plaque. It's the thousands of children who received better emergency care because one little girl grew up to become a doctor dedicated to helping kids who'd been hurt like she was. That's the Charles Bronson story that matters. Not the vigilante movies or the stone-faced characters, but the man who witnessed an injustice and refused to let it stand. The man who understood that sometimes being a hero means making sure the right thing happens, even when, especially when, nobody else is willing to fight for it. Because sometimes justice doesn't just happen on its own. Sometimes it needs someone with the courage to demand it, and the persistence to make sure it gets delivered.